Anita, and welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. What I'm just going to do tonight is to go through the CBA process in CSP and literally how to do the CBA essentially. So just a small bit, firstly, of background information about myself. So I've been teaching CSP since 1999. And I've also been working in UCC as a pedagogy lecturer in CSP for the PME program since 2006. And I also worked then as an advisor to the teaching council for CSP and for politics and society. And as you can see there as well, the main thing I suppose with it is the CSP textbook that is now in its second edition, Call to Action, which I wrote. So a lot of you may be familiar with the first edition, but the second edition is just coming out. And I suppose a lot of what I'm going to look at tonight is based on how the CBA process, I suppose, has evolved and how we're more, I suppose, familiar with it now than we would have been before. And I know myself from teaching it, it's actually very, very handy to be able to, the longer you're doing something, the easier it gets and the more experience you have of it. So I've put a lot of that into the second edition of Call to Action that may not have been really in the first edition. We have a certain amount there, but there's more gone into it. The agenda for tonight is literally what we're just going to do first of all is an introduction to what CSP actually is. Secondly, looking at planning for action, so how to go about doing an action. The next thing, there's two kind of areas. There's the citizenship action and there's the CBA, and to try to explain what each of those ones are. We look at some sample actions. We look at two sample CBAs, one an individual, one a group one, and we look at how to complete the citizenship action record. And finally, we'll just mention what the features of quality are. So in other words, the marking of the CBA. Firstly, I suppose when I'm looking at the introduction to CSP, I'm conscious for a number of people, you might be doing it for the first time, whereas for other people, you might be doing it for years. So it depends on the background. So I do want to start, I suppose, with a small bit about what CSP is. So first of all, CSP is a short course and it must be taught for 100 hours over the course of junior cycle, like any junior cycle short course. And of course, as well as being a short course, then every short course is assessed by a CBA. There's a slight difference. If you taught CSP a number of years ago, before the current junior cycle, it would have been for 70 hours rather than 100 hours. And it would have been assessed by a terminal exam for the junior cert and by an action project. There are elements of similarities between the CBA and the action project, but there's a lot of differences as well. And I want to point those out as we're going through it. And I suppose the 100 hours, if you're talking about it in a school basis, that's if you're in a school that is 40-minute class periods per week, that means over 2 of the years of junior cycle, it must be allocated 2 classes per week. And over the third year, it's allocated 1 class per week. If you're in a school that has 1 hour classes, it means there's 1 hour of CSP, so there's 1 class per week in first, 1 hour per week in second year, and 1 hour per week in third year. As well as that, it's part of the wellbeing program. So that's where the 100 hours actually come from. And as part of the wellbeing program, it's I suppose the key things are to be aware of the wellbeing indicators. And in each lesson in Call to Action, I do indicate what are the wellbeing indicators that are being used. A lot of the time for CSP, it's being connected and being aware. But there are others such as responsible, respected. When they're doing an action, it's very often active, resilient, and respected. Sorry, the other ones that come in as well. So there is that connection to the well-being. But as I said, I've mentioned it at the beginning of each lesson call to action, so you know what well-being indicators are being referred to. When it comes, if any of you are familiar, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the first edition of Call to Action, and you'll be aware that there's significant planning documentation that comes with it. In the first edition, you had the 27 units of learning, but I hadn't allocated a specific time for the CBA. I have in the new edition of Call to Action in their planning documents put it in for second year. Now that's because I think most schools tend to do it in second year, but these planning documents, they're all editable. So it means that literally if you're doing it in third year, it's very, very easy to edit it. So you get the same planning documents, but because they're Word documents, they're very, very easy to edit, and they're on Google Classroom. As I mentioned there, the 1 hour class and the 40-minute class, schools will be operating one or the other. They're done on the basis of one class per week, but if you're doing it over two classes, they can be split and you can choose which elements to do. What you end up with actually with 40-minute classes, you end up teaching more CSP because it comes to a higher amount of hours than the 1 hour class. But the planning documentation is in the teacher's resource book and on Google Classroom as well. The next area just to look at is citizenship action and the CBA. So if anyone ever taught the old junior cert CSP course, one of the big things that was problematic was trying to get students aware of the skills that they used. And again, junior cycle, there's very much a strong emphasis on the various different skills. So what I choose to do from the beginning and what I put specifically into the book, and you'll remember if any of you are using the first edition, but I've also kept it for the second edition, is that each exercise points out using the icons what skills are being used. So for example, in this one, we can see that the key skills are identified at the beginning, and the key skills there are managing myself, managing information and thinking, and being literate. And it is worthwhile pointing that out as you're going along because it makes it a lot easier when they come to writing and discussing the skills that they use. Likewise, there's another example here where you can see again the skills identified there, which are working with others, communicating, managing information and thinking, and being creative. So again, as you're teaching them, even before you go to use to do the CBA, it's worthwhile pointing out what are the skills that you used here. It just makes it an awful lot easier for them to identify when they actually go to write it up. The second area that was always problematic in the old junior cert course, and you see the reason I'm saying this is it becomes the same when they have to identify them in the CBA as well when they write up their record. Skills is one of the weak areas that they often can't identify, and the other is reflection. And the easier thing to do is to keep an emphasis on that throughout the whole course in CSP rather than just when you're doing the CBA. So reflection is also really important in this. And again, at the end of each chapter in Call to Action, there's a reflection section. And I've developed that again a little bit because I think it's really important to have scaffolding in that. So that often they end up describing what they did. They don't actually realize reflection is talking about what have I learned from doing this. So again, the idea of that being done on a constant basis is something that's worth considering. So often this is quite confusing to explain the difference between the two, a citizenship action and a citizenship action record. So in the guidelines and in the specification for CSP, you're told the students in CSP must do 3 citizenship actions throughout the 3 years of junior cycle. Now that often is confusing because people think, do they need to do 3 CBAs? They don't. What they need to do is 3 actions, and generally first, second, and third year they do an action each. They don't all need to be very big actions. Some of the actions could be quite small. It could be designing a poster on a particular topic, for instance. So so that would be your citizenship action. So they do an action in each year, but one of those actions then becomes the CBA. So it has to be a second year action or a third year action. And literally, the action isn't much different, but it's how they write it up is the key part. So it's the write up of the action they've done that becomes their CBA. I'll explain that in more detail when I actually go through examples. One of the things I suppose that can be difficult is to know, well, what counts as an action? So what are the things that I could actually do? So for anyone that used the first edition of the book, you'll see that there were 8 actions given after each chapter. And I've changed that because what I decided to do is to move all the actions into the new chapter on the CBA and actions. And the reason there being that it allows you to pick whatever action you want. Whereas I think before people felt I have to do such an action because it's planned at a particular time. Whereas there were eight in total, there's now 16. So a lot of the ones that you'd have met from before, which would have been the one inviting a guest speaker, having a bake sale, and so on, there have also been added to. So I've put in things such as you can see here, creating a swap shop, setting up a reuse booth, and so on. So there are a number, there's quite a number with 16 to choose from. So it does make it easier to pick. In addition to that, some of the lessons as well in call to action, such as creating an infographic or conducting a mock trial, those ones could also be used as actions. What I also did though this time is I've added in the citizenship action. You can just see an example of it there on the right. It's a record of the actions that don't become the CBA. Because what I found is that I generally take over CSP classes from second and third year. So I tend not to have first year classes, and as a result of that, then often they don't remember what they did in first year. So I think it's really important that it's logged somewhere. So it's a very short, it's just a page. They give a brief summary of what their action was. They just tick the skills that they used, and they give a very, very short reflection on it. But it just means that the other two actions they do, the two that don't become the CBA, that they're recorded somewhere. So it's useful for a teacher taking over. It's also useful, for example, in the case of an inspection, you can say, well, they did this action in first year, they did this action in third year, for instance. So that's something that's new, but I think it's a really important thing to actually record the smaller actions that they did. So two of the three actions will just be smaller actions and a very brief piece to record them. But that's something that's new in the second edition. So, how does the CBA differ from the other actions? The main way is that the CBA is presented as a citizenship action record. So, they have to write a more detailed record. So, the piece I just looked at there is just a simple page, very, very brief logging of what they actually, summary of their action, their skills, and what they learned. This one is more detailed for CBA. So it needs to be, as I said, more detailed, and it's normally describes a more comprehensive action. So it tends to be a bigger project as such, but there's more emphasis goes into the reflection and to the skills that are used. So the citizenship action record, what's the process? So they need to look, first of all, they need to be something that personally engages the student. They need to be, it needs to involve the planning, the research, the implementation, and the reflection. Now, if you had taught, for example, the old junior cert and the action project, there wasn't as much emphasis given to the planning and the research that went into it. It tended to be more on the implementation and the reflection, but the whole process goes into this. A really key thing that's different between this and the old action project is evidence needs to be kept and shown. So when they present their record, they also need to present the evidence of what they've done. I've just given some examples there. So for example, an email, poster, screenshots, and so on. Next then is when to do the CBA and literally how to do the CBA. So first of all, the idea over the course of the 3 years, you have your three citizenship actions. One of these then becomes a CBA. And in CSP, there's only one CBA covered. There's only one CBA done. And I know at the moment there's a lot of subjects have two CBAs, but one of them is suspended at the moment. But in CSP, there is only one. So it's not one in second year and one in third year. It's only one in total. But the key part there is it must be done in either second or third year. So, for example, you do a project and they write it up in first year, it won't count. It has to be one from second or third year. I did some research online. It's only very, very basic research, but just asking a question on social media. And of that, over 100 responses, about 75% are doing it in second year, about 25% are doing it in third year. So I do it in second year generally as well, and it's a handy time to do it. But there's reasons why I do it in second year. It means I have them twice a week in second year. If I was taking the third year, I'd only have them once a week. The school also prefers to the idea that they have their CBAs done in second year so they can focus on exams. I think that's generally the reason why people would opt for second year, but it's not necessarily it's not it doesn't have to be done in second year. It could be done in third as well. One other point there in the guidelines, they suggest that it would be covered between would be 6 to 8 hours given to doing CBA. In reality, I don't think that's practical because in most subjects, the CBA window is for 3 weeks. So if you're teaching an hour-long class, that's 3 hours you have, not 6 to 8 hours. And I think it's actually practical to get the whole lot done within the 3 hours as well. So again, going into the process, the aim is to develop active citizenship skills and to reflect on on their learning. So that's a key part that has to be in their record, that they want to see what are the skills that I developed and how do I know I learned them, or what did I learn. So the class ideally decide on an issue that's of interest to them and related to the topic studied. The students research the topic and may do some research at home. The students then develop an action plan, they implement the action, they decide how to present the citizenship action record, and then they may present it to a suitable audience afterwards. In addition, how do they do the CBA? There's two real ways in which you can do it. There's a third suggested, but I don't opt for it. The two main ways are as an individual CBA or as part of a group action. Either way, their individual citizenship action record must be done individually. So if they're part of a group, for instance, it's not the group that writes up the record. Each person writes up the record themselves. So each student does that themselves. And there's pros and cons of doing both. So what I'm going to look at is examples of an individual one and examples of a group one as well, and just how they can actually be done. So next, a citizenship action record should. So there's a number of factors that it should involve. So it should involve action of some sort. Research, though, on its own without an action is not enough. So if they just research a topic, that's not enough. They have to do something with it. So one of the examples we'll be looking at shortly is the idea of creating an infographic. So they do need to research to get the information, but the production of the infographic and then using it, printing it off, putting it up places, that's the action because that's convincing people to change their daily things that they do that are, for example, bad for the environment, we could say. It's also important that they increase the students' capacity to gain access to information and to structures. So again, the idea that they might be able to email somebody, they might be able to contact somebody, they might know where to look for information. And again, to allow them to see connections between areas covered in CSP and their everyday life. And again, some of those things would come down to the idea we might be covering a topic in CSP, such as water, such as I've put two new areas into sustainability, for example, in the new edition of Call to Action, and that's rewilding and fast fashion. So they may choose to do the infographic on areas like that. But the idea is that these are things that are related to their everyday life, and yet they're covered in class. And often they don't see the link until they actually have to do that. Um, Next piece there is the considerations, some key considerations before beginning an action. So firstly, do the students have suggestions? They tend to work best when their ideas the students themselves are interested in. Sometimes you may need to guide them with that as well, but you might say, give examples of these are things that I've used before, these are things that I've done before. So one instance that I can think of is in the case of fundraising. So I would have explained fundraising we might have done for an organization, but there might be students who are particularly interested or who have family interested in a different organization and say, we could do such a thing, and what are the ways we could fundraise? But when it comes from the students themselves, they tend to be more engaged. So it's not like you're telling them what to do, it's actually their project more so. Another consideration that's really important is agreement of school management needed. So it could be the case, for example, that you're bringing in somebody from outside, you may be taking the students from outside the school, you may be fundraising. All those are things that may need management's okay, particularly fundraising. What resources are required? Very often, so I've had examples, for example, of fundraising where students wanted to be able to sell a product, but in order to sell the product, they needed to buy it. I had examples of them organizing a raffle where they got really good prizes, but that was through sponsorship. So rather than actually purchasing it and costing money, Or that's just one example. It's really important to consider what resources are required in advance of doing it. What's the time required to complete the action? It may sound like a fantastic action, but if it takes 10 weeks, it's not something that's going to work. Who runs the action? And again, my students very often want the idea of a 24-hour soccer marathon, for instance. But again, in a case like that, a lot of the action is run by the teacher. So therefore, in that case, it diminishes what they're actually doing, and it also adds the work that you have to do. And then to decide, will it be individual, small group, or whole class action? I don't go for the small group because the small group is something in between that they're all doing. Small groups are doing individual CBAs. It's much easier to go for the individual students doing one on their own on a general theme, or to have the whole class doing a specific piece with individual tasks allocated. And I'll give the two examples of those in a minute so we can understand it. In the case of an individual action, then, what are the key parts that are involved? So it is important to have a task on a common theme. So the example we're going to look at in a few minutes will be an infographic because it's one that I use. But we do it in second year. The theme we've been doing at the time is sustainability. So that's the common theme, but they have choice within that theme as to how they're going to do their infographic. So some, for instance, might do 6 ways to save water. Some of them might do 6 ways to reduce electricity use or electricity wastage. So they're all related to sustainability, but they're different areas that they can choose to look at. Now, in reality, if you have 30 students in your class, you're not going to have 30 different ones, but it just leads to enough variety. It's really key that they know the planning, they know the evidence of the action as they're going along, because there's a tendency for students to forget to keep that. And by the time they come to the end in the write-up, they've lost all the evidence and they can't remember the stages. One example I can think of is when they're researching websites, that they need to log those straight away, because if they don't, they'll forget where they got the information from. They conduct the task next, they note the skills that were used, they reflect on the action, and then they write up or they present to the CPA. If it's a group action, there's a small difference. So first of all, again, you agree the issue, but then you need to decide and allocate roles and specific responsibilities. And then as a result of that, you also need to plan the tasks and how to achieve them. What's really important there is that if students are allocated to a specific team, that they don't cross over and do take the tasks of a different team, because what happens in that case is it makes it very hard for the students of the other team if their jobs have been taken and done already. So it's really important that there's a clear idea as to when it's the group who's doing what. The rest is the same really as for the individual. They conduct the task and keep evidence, they note the skills, they reflect, and then they write up and are present to the CBA. If it's a group action, one of the key parts is forming teams. So in doing so, it's important to decide how many roles are needed. So again, talking about a class of 30, you're unlikely to have 30 different people allocated something separately in a group activity. So you're talking about teams. Six would be plenty. But again, these are the six roles. So, for example, go back to the bake sales. So the idea of somebody for PR, somebody to sell it, somebody to count the money. You might invite in a guest speaker afterwards to present the money to them. So some group that's tasked with that particular area. When we look at the group activity in a minute, and I'll show how that actually works. Secondly, then to give names to each team. So it's a finance team, the letter writing team, the design team, the public relations team, etc. And again, that the name of the team reflects what the task is. So they know what it is. So even when they're in the teams, they may do different tasks. So it might be a PR team. One does a poster, one sends out an email, one makes an announcement on the intercom. There's different tasks within it, but in all, they work together as a team to raise awareness of the action. Decide on the number of people per team. And again, this doesn't need to be uniform. So we mentioned the PR team. You might only have 3 people on the PR team, but if it's something that involves sales and you're selling to the whole school, 3 people isn't enough. You might end up with 10 or 12 people doing that. So they don't need to be uniform in size. So again, you have to think of how many people do I need to do this? And then allocating students to teams. It tends to be easier if you do it yourself. If the students opt to do it, they tend to want to do all the same jobs their friends are doing, or else they want to do certain jobs and no one wants to do other ones. I use random .org. It's a random number generator. I think it's just the fairest way. We do it there in class. They're all allocated a number between 1 and 30. So then as the numbers come up, they choose what team they're members of. It also is kind of above board. They can see that it wasn't me picking them. Um, Another way you could do it is to pre-plan. You could decide in advance. One thing just to be really careful of is when you're allocating roles, just there may be students that are absent. It's really important they're assigned to a particular team because what can well happen is you don't realize until time has passed that somebody hasn't actually been allocated a team and they don't let you know until there's almost nothing left to do. So when it comes to planning tasks, then it's really important that each team decides the tasks that they should do. So in other words, our job is going to be such a thing. I'll do this if you do that, and somebody else does something else. So they're given different tasks within it. What I use is a shared Google Doc. So we use Google Classroom. I create a Google Doc and we put in the teams, and then they put into that who's going to do what. And that's really useful because that gives you evidence as well of the planning. So it means that you can add that a screenshot of that Google Doc where they had planned who was doing what becomes part of their evidence when they for the report. So again, keep evidence of the work that's completed. Wakelet.com, it's a kind of like Padlet, but it's really useful for research. I create a class on it, and literally what happens then is, and it's free, what happens is the students will research videos, they'll research websites, they look at infographics, they look at lots of information online to get their information. But they right click the web address, they copy it and they paste it into Wakelet, and it comes up, John Murphy added this at whatever time. So the sources of their evidence are actually recorded there as well. So it's another way of recording evidence, and it's quite easy. So literally, once they're finished, they add it in because they have a tendency to never note where they got the information, and then they've forgotten where it came from. And then finally, to note the positive and negative aspects as they're going along. Because often when they're finished, they think it always very enjoyable and they've done loads. They've forgotten the negative parts, they've forgotten the downsides. I have one example of a bake sale, for example, we had it set up, and the PR team's job was to try to announce to people the day before to bring in cakes to sell the following day. They never put out the announcement. So it meant there were no cakes. So that was an example of how the whole project was held up because one team didn't do their job, which is good because it lets them see how each group relies on the others. So when it goes to completing the action, you may find that some teams are finished earlier. It depends on the type of project. So it is the case. We'll go back even to the bake sale, for instance. In that case, you will have teams that are finished. So the team, for example, that was selling, they're going to be finished faster than the people who are counting up the money and converting it, we say, into a check. And likewise, the other teams again that can't start. It's easier with the case of the teams who are finished already. They can begin writing up their record at that time. But it's perfectly normal in a group task that you will have teams finished at different times. It's really important though that you help teams to work together. Sometimes they will pass on the information. A lot of the time they do their job, but they don't pass it on to the next. So it's important to keep the connections going between the teams at all times. So to keep an eye. So for example, the PR team in that particular case, it was really important of the bake sale. It was really important that they be reminded that you need to put out an announcement because if you don't, there'll be no cakes. So the next team can't sell the cakes. So again, it is important that liaison between the different teams in a group activity. So the first sample one that we're going to look at there is the idea of an individual, first of all, and the idea is that it'll be creating and promoting an infographic. This is one I've done every year since the CBA started, and it's actually very manageable. It looks really well. The students are very happy with what they produce, and it can be done within that narrow time frame of 3 weeks. So again, each student prepares an infographic on sustainability. It doesn't have to be sustainability, it could be any topic, but that is the topic we've been covering and the time period that's allocated for the CBA and CSP. In our case, it's always, say, the November, early December, that stretch there. So what I get students to do then is take an element of sustainability, and then they have to come up with four, five, six generally reasons are tips that you could do to save water, to reduce your consumption of electricity, and so on. So it's an individual one, though. Each creates their own, and that's one advantage of the individual, that everybody is kind of working at the same rate. They know they're on the same task, but they're creating something individual. So what I would do with that is I create an evidence folder on the school's online learning site. We use Google Classroom, so I literally just open this folder called evidence folder. It's like a homework exercise. So what they do is they screenshot or they take photos of the evidence of what they've done. So it might be the sites they've looked up, it might be a plan that they've made out on it, but they submit all that on an ongoing basis. So it means that it's all actually there and it's all recorded. We decided the topic of the infographic. And again, I keep it quite broad so we don't have 30 that are saying 30 ways, 30 people saying 6 ways to save water. So there's a bit of variety there. And I really stress the idea that students use at least three different sources to get their information. One of the big problems nowadays is that often when they go onto the internet, the first thing they see is an AI response and they say, can we use this? So I said, no, you can't. What you have to do is you have to show the three sources that you've got. So you can't take the AI version. So that's just something just to watch for the AI version. And again, the idea that I asked them to put it on Wakelet means that it's recorded as well. I also asked the students to create a rough diagram of what their infographic would look like prior to allowing them to go onto Canva, because what they tend to do then is they just go straight into the Canva template and they're going between their research and trying to type it up. I asked them to make out what are the 6 points you want to say and what are the sentences in advance. And that then is added as evidence of what they've been doing as well. I use Canva all the time to create the infographics. It's very, very useful. I know a lot of teachers do use it, but if you don't, it's quite easy to follow. There are YouTube videos that show you how to do it. There's some guidance in the teacher's book of edition one, and it's also in the second edition of Call to Action. But as well as that, it's really straightforward to use. As a teacher, you can get a professional account as well for free, which is really handy. So you set that up and you give the link to your students, because if you don't do it that way and if you ask them to log in themselves without you having an account, it means you can't monitor what they're actually doing themselves. So often they do really brilliant infographics, but they've misspelled the title. So if it's done as a teacher's there's an option to send to teacher, you can correct the imperfections or tell them what they need to correct. So again, we use Chromebooks in schools to create the infographic in class, generally two classes to get it done, and that's 40-minute classes. At the end, then what I do is I download the infographics and I use the print group that the school uses for things like programs. They will print off the infographics generally for about €30, but they're really professional when they're done. So you can see an example there of one of them, 4 ways to save energy in the home. So you can see in that particular example, there's the 4 pieces of information given. They've chosen the pictures, they've chosen the colors. Another example here of how to reduce your carbon footprint. And again, you can see 6 examples given there, bright colors and opting again, in that case, for pictures as well. It's really important that they know to do that as well. And here's another one. So top 5 ways to reduce your carbon footprint. And again, you can see the same idea. They can change every color that's in it. They can add as pictures, take away pictures, change the size of the font. It's very, very easy to play around with once they actually get onto it. But what it does produce is something that looks so professional that it could have been produced by an organization. And here's just one other one as well. So that would be the individual one. But then group one, and I'd been slow to do a group one, but this year is the first time I did one in a while. And it came it came about naturally enough because what happened is we'd been covering, it was actually in Call to Action, one of the exercises there on food waste. And students had loads of suggestions as to how to reduce food waste within the school. And we decided to use that to conduct a survey and to see how to do it. So it was a survey literally on food waste in the school. So we set up our teams first, and our teams, we had an organizing team. So their job was to get permission from management to send out emails to parents, for example, the survey to parents, to send it out to students. We had a PR team to make people aware of it, survey question and design team. We had an interview team because they interviewed then the cleaners, they interviewed the staff in the canteen, they interviewed year heads, they interviewed the principal on what were the main types of food waste and what were things that may have been done in the past but didn't work and why. There was an analysis and report writing team, and then there was a team that made a presentation to the Green Schools Committee, and also there was a team that made out an infographic based on the findings of the survey. So it worked out really well, but there are challenges that are in that is that you have different teams finished at different times. Now, it was the case that they wrote it up as soon as they were finished their own task within it. In that particular case, we had week one, we were looking at roles and drafting it. Week two is the design, promotion, and data collection, analysis and preparing for presentation, and then presentations and write-up. It does take a bit longer, and you're kind of more involved to make sure that one team is informing the next team of what they need to do. So in chapter 9 of the first edition, we did look at the CBA, but I've added a lot more to it this time. So I've put in additional guidance for the students. But as well as that, what I've done is I've put in additional guidance for the teachers in the TRB as well. And I've given 16 different sample ones just to give you a maximum choice in the things that you can actually do. So all of that is in chapter 9 and in the TRB, again, the specific guidance for teachers. I also have, same as with the first edition, allowed for 3 options. So students can write the CBA into the textbook. There's also an editable template on Google Classroom where they can actually type it up. And you can also download that PDF and photocopy it and give it to students to do. And that tends to be the one that I actually do myself because it means they can continue to work with the book. But it varies. Some people prefer to keep it in the book so it's actually recorded as well. I've put in these are the various different elements of it. You have a title, the reason, the summary, evidence, what I learned, the skills, and reflection. I'll go through each of those. So in the template that's in Call to Action, and it's similar enough to the template for the first edition, but I've made a few tweaks to it. First of all, the title, a clear title that sums up what the action was. So conducting a class presidential election. That's pretty clear what the action entailed. So why do we do it? So we decided to invite a guest speaker to talk to the class about homelessness. It was important because we learned a lot about the causes of the problem and some solutions that could be considered. What's really important there is that it's not a case that we did it because we had to do a CBA. You need to show the personal engagement, and that's a part of it. So a summary of what exactly happened. So someone who knew nothing about it would know what happened. So I've provided for 2 options. If they did it as an individual, they just write about their own tasks. If there's a group task, they write about what the whole group did, and then they write about their own specific tasks within the group. So evidence, so students, it's a really key thing about the CBA that the evidence needs to be collated and they need to capture it each step along the way. So using photos, videos, and so on, and it must show how they personally engaged in it. So there is a piece here where they can stick all that information into it. They can also do that digitally. The next piece is what I learned. So this is literally the facts that they learned from doing it. So I learned that voting with PRSTD means you're not just picking one person, you rank them. So it's the facts rather than what they learned from doing it. So it's the facts they learned from it that goes in there. Skills then, you have the 8 junior cycle skills there. We referenced them in the beginning, but it's really important they can say what skills did I use and how I used them and why I used them. So I built that in. So they write about the skill they used, working with others. I made a phone call. Why? I ran 3 sustainable projects with accept school tours and how I spoke politely and explained. The guidelines look at some questions to guide reflection, and those are the questions that they put in. So I've left them there, but I tend not to use those myself. I actually use different questions, and these are the questions that I tend to use. In the second edition, I've put in more scaffolding activities on reflection, so they are more familiar with the process as well. But these types of questions help them reflect. So, what did you enjoy about working in a team or on your own? What was hard about it? What have you learned from taking part? What advice would you give to a friend? And what would you do differently? And what worked well? So finally, then the features of quality. So if it's exceptional, these are the key words that I've taken out. So it's fully and effectively engaged. Personal reflections are of excellent quality, presented in a highly effective manner. So one thing that you'll get emailed on to you afterwards is a sample CBA template, a record, sorry, that has been filled out by a student and awarded an exceptional mark, just to show how it's actually allocated. In the TRB, there'll also be an example, as well as that, of in line with expectations and a sample marking scheme as well, as to how a marking rubric as to how to actually mark a piece. These are other possible actions you could consider: creating a booklet on sustainable actions, a cookery booklet with local ingredients, organizing student council election, a trip to sustainable project, a quarter or octus visit, or video making. Any of those are possible other ones as well. So I think that kind of brings me to the end of what I was of the presentation as such. Just a reminder again, I think for anyone who wouldn't have used a call to action one, you may not be aware that there is a digital package which is really important because it's there to support the teachers and the teachers resource book as well, because that is the guidance that you need to actually do the projects and to do to write up the record. And it does include an awful, it's more teacher focused and based on the teacher. So that's one thing that's really important about it. And just to make sure that when you contact the rep, that you see what that entails as well. Okay, Anita, I think that brings me to the end of the presentation. Are there
Well
any
done,
questions?
Gearoid. Sign of a real pro. Well done. Great, great timing. Fantastic presentation. Well done. So much practical help in there for a lot of the issues I know that we've heard about that CSPE teachers are facing around that, the whole setting up and carrying out of the citizenship action and the CBAs. I do have to say you're endlessly calm. If I had a class that were doing a bake sale and they ended up with no cakes, I'd feel like lose my mind. But you were just so calm and methodical the way you went through it. So great presentation. Thank you. So listen, I'm just going to give you a breather. We're just going to go through some of the questions. So just one for me, first of all. We had a number of people, both during the presentation and prior to the presentation, asking us about where they can get a sample of the new edition of Call to Action. Just, I would say to you, your rep is your best friend. Get in touch with your rep and they will sort you out with a sample. You'll see on our website, if you go to it, there's a Find Your Rep button in the top right-hand corner, but you'll also have a link in the email that you'll receive tomorrow morning, and that will be how to find your rep. So definitely get in touch with your rep. So, Gearoid, if you are ready to go again, can I just pop a few questions to you? A lot of them were actually answered during the presentation, which was great. So you're right on the money there. Kieran asked, is it best to share success criteria with students at the beginning of the CBA? And if so, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think so. It's always a good idea because they know what to expect. Every exercise, even in call to action, I've put down the success criteria so they know, say, when they're finished. So they're used to the term success criteria. And I think it's a really good thing to be able to say, we'll take the example of the infographic. Well, how do we know literally that when we're finished that we've done the right thing? So I think what's really the kind of thing you could say there, success criteria. I have produced an interesting, informative infographic that's bright, that's clear to follow, that would convince students to make changes to the way, for example, they use their water, for instance. So I think it's really good idea. I suppose the key thing you do first is to decide what the action is going to be, but then decide what a success criteria is. And that's something that you can actually say to the class in advance. What's the success criteria for this? And they'll give you suggestions. Often, they consider things you mightn't consider yourself as well, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
but it's
Brilliant.
all good
Yeah,
practice.
good advice. All very practical, and you're really bringing the class along with you, of course, when you do that as
Yeah.
well, as opposed to trying to be up there and just pushing out all the time. We had a couple of questions about the CBA. One you've answered. Claire had wanted to know, would you recommend we do the CBA in second year or third year? But you answered that during your presentation, I feel. Do you want to speak to that again, or do you? I
Yeah,
think you covered it
I
quite.
think so. I suppose sometimes schools don't get, or teachers don't get the choices. The school makes it up. But my preference would be second year because they're less distracted by exams. In our school, we have them twice a week. In second year, we only have them once a week. In third year, that might be different though in other schools. So I suppose if you did have them in third year, you could do something like a mock trial or a mock election or something like that as part of your CBA because they kind of tie into the topics that are covered there. But yeah.
Well, that's answered Maeve's question as well then, because Maeve had wanted to know, if you do it in third year, what CBAs would you recommend? So the two you suggested there, a mock trial and a mock
And
election.
a mock election, yeah,
Yeah,
mock election especially is really good because there's enough to keep everybody involved, but they learn something from it as well. And actually, if you're
brilliant.
doing a mock election, a mock presidential is probably the easiest one to do because it's easier than trying to do three people in one class to get three people elected in a multi-seat. So
Very good.
it's one of the things in call to action actually there as well because there is guidance on how to do a mock election, but it's a nice one to do in third year.
With my adult head on me, I find the subject so brilliant. I wish I could study it myself, but that's another day's work and another webinar perhaps. Um, Sean says he's already using the first edition of Call to Action, and what will be different in the second edition? You want to talk a bit to that?
Yeah, yeah. I suppose the big thing that really helped me was teaching it myself. So I actually could see what worked really well, but I could also see how I needed to tweak things in places. So I think the second edition does that. One of the things was what we're talking about tonight, literally the actions were after each chapter before, whereas I've taken them all and put them into the final chapter. So it gives you an awful lot more options. I think people kind of felt before that I can only do this action after such a thing, whereas now you have 16 actions that are all there and they can pick from them. So there's more guidance given on that as well. I think the other thing too is that there's an action record for the two minor actions that are done as well. I've slightly amended the template as well to make it easier to fill in and be easier for the teacher to actually correct as you're going through it as well. One of the things I think that came back to us a bit as well was words. So sometimes words were difficult in vocab. So we put in word banks as well to explain them. And we've some fantastic work done in digital that actually means that now you can actually use digital to actually teach the words as well. So they're matching them up with explanations, or you might have three words, which is the best explanation of it in advance of doing the lesson, which actually helps a lot. I think as well, some of the difficult material around trade and some of those things, I took them out and replaced them maybe with more student-friendly lessons, such as recycling was one of the, rewilding, fast fashion, AI, and so on, so that it's more interesting for the teachers as well in the planning. I've put a lot more into the differentiation as well in the planning documentation, so it gives you more options of things that you can choose from. There's a call to action task which is a new thing. So it's not homework as such, but if they want to develop what they've been doing in class, they can do that as well. And I suppose I've added more variety within the lessons as well. So there's a video for most lessons, almost every lesson, but you have maybe a piece where there's listening, there's a video piece, there's a quiz, there's a discussion. So there's more variety within the lessons as well. And the reflection section has developed as well. So I put in mind maps and need more scaffold activities to help them through that as well. Because we had one, and there was normally one piece or two pieces in the teacher's resource book and then digital, but I put more into the actual book itself this time as well. And I suppose the only other major thing is there's probably more up-to-date topics that are gone into it as well. I think essentially, if you use the first edition and you liked it, it keeps what you liked, but it's better.
Mm, yeah,
So
brilliant.
I think that's kind of it.
Well said. Yeah, well said. And I think it's just important, I guess, for people to understand as well that when we start to work on a new edition, we do it based on feedback. We do very robust surveying of people who are using the book already. And exactly like you said, we find out what they loved and what could be improved. And so all of that you spoke to is really reflecting what teachers on the ground are looking for. So it makes it, again, just really practical and topical and up to the minute and all of that. So yeah, brilliant. Great. So look, we are now, we're coming up to 8 o'clock. So we're going to park it there. As I mentioned at the top, any questions that we didn't get to answer this evening or that weren't answered in the course of Gearoid's presentation, your rep will follow up with you. So don't worry, no questions will go unanswered. We will send out an email to you tomorrow with a recording of this evening's webinar. There'll be a link to the website where you can sample the new edition of Call to Action online and the digital resources that Gearoid spoke to. And you'll also find in the email how to contact your rep. And then the final thing is that you're going to get your free resource that was promised, which is the sample completed CBA template that Gearoid spoke to as well. So that will all hopefully reach you fairly early tomorrow. The final thing just to say to you is just again to mention your local rep. They really are your they will work alongside you. So as I say, if you need a sample of the book, do reach out to them. If you're trying to figure out how to get the best value from your school book grant, anything like that, the rep is there to work with you and try and figure out the best solution for you and your school. So please do reach out to your rep. They're just waiting on your call. Great. So again, I would like to thank Gearoid very much for this evening's presentation. A really big thank you to everybody for joining us this evening, and good night and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you. Thanks, Gearoid.
Everybody. Thanks, Nita.